Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the dim corridors of the past, where torches flicker like nervous hearts and every shadow feels like it's waiting to whisper a secret you're not supposed to know. You breathe in that cold medieval air, yeah, the one that smells faintly of damp stone and unwashed ambition, and you probably won't survive this, but don't worry, the story will. Before we drift too deep, here's your tiny reminder. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, go on and comment your location and the local time so I know when and where you're joining this quiet little history hangout. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander through the thought of medieval people died young, and you can feel your modern brain twitch. You picture grimy villages where everyone collapses at 30, right? Someone sneezes next to a cow and boom, lifespan over. But as you drift further in, the idea settles like dust motes in lamplight. It's not that everyone lived short, frantic lives, it's that the numbers themselves told stories in misleading ways. And you sense you're about to walk right into that mathematical labyrinth. You step through an imagined wooden doorway, the planks warped and creaking under your fingers, and the first truth hovers over your shoulder. When historians talk about medieval life expectancy, they're juggling averages that get absolutely wrecked by infant deaths. You move softly through that notion, like tiptoeing over scattered chicken feed. A baby not surviving its first year pulls the whole average crashing down. You feel the weight of the number bending, almost snapping, as if you're pressing a finger on a fragile scale. And as you breathe out, you realize you've already brushed against one mainstream historical fact, though it feels strangely intimate. You slide further along a muddy path in your mind, watching adults who actually make it to their teens. They don't look like the fragile figures pop culture paints for you. You notice one man swinging an axe, wood chips exploding in rhythmic puffs. His arms are lean, strong. He's in his 40s, which, surprise, wasn't some impossible age. You catch the slight smirk on his face, as if he's amused by the myth you carried in with you. You feel the sarcasm in the air. Oh, you thought we all dropped dead at 29. Cute. Still, the thought gnaws at you. Why does the myth persist? You wander deeper into the village, letting the smoke from a nearby hearth curl around your senses. You see the ledger keeper of this imaginary place, an elderly monk hunched over ink and vellum, scratching numbers with eerie precision. You peer over his shoulder, watching birth and death entries pile up like fallen leaves. A baby gone at 3 days. Another gone before their first winter. 2 toddlers lost during a fever outbreak. You're not just reading numbers, you're feeling them tug at your sleeve. And there's a quirky detail that rolls by like a playful breeze. Medieval scribes sometimes drew tiny doodles, little cats, birds, or even cheeky faces, on the edges of their manuscripts. You picture one of those doodles staring up at you now, tilting its head as if mocking the seriousness of mortality. You let that image warm you for a moment. You step through the village square, listening to distant laughter and the clatter of hooves on cobblestone. Then the scholar's voice, your inner narrator in a dusty robe, murmurs that scholars still argue whether some medieval records inflated ages for prestige, especially when describing nobility or religious elders. You raise an eyebrow. Even in the past, people were tweaking numbers to look good. Some things never change. You trail your fingers along a wooden fence and feel the rough texture catch your skin. People here lived hard lives, sure, but not necessarily short ones, at least not once they cleared the deadly gauntlet of early childhood. You watch a woman in her mid-30s stir a pot over a fire, her face drawn with exhaustion but also glowing with resilience. You feel yourself drifting into her routine, waking before sunrise, enduring physical labor, then collapsing into a straw mattress by candlelight. And yet she doesn't seem like she's almost dead, the way modern myth would want you to think. She looks like someone who knows how to exist in a world that asks too much but never apologizes. The sounds fade, replaced by a quiet wind brushing through wheat fields at the edge of town. You follow it, letting your footsteps sink into soft soil. You imagine someone reaching the age of 50 out here, rare, but not extraordinary enough to be shocking. You picture celebrations for the few who lived long enough to see grandchildren stumbling around the fields. You let that image settle into your mind like warm bread cooling on a wooden board. You feel your perspective shifting along with the landscape. The real fear wasn't growing old. The real fear was not making it past the first few years. You stand at the threshold of a small churchyard, your breath slowing as you sense the countless young lives marked by tiny, weathered stones. The average lifespan number suddenly feels less like a data point and more like a sigh, quiet, sorrowful, but honest. You wander back toward the center of the scene, the way someone retraces their steps after a dream. The air feels a little heavier now, but comforting too, like a blanket woven from truths you weren't expecting. You realize how misunderstood this whole medieval people died young thing truly is. The truth is a constellation of risk, resilience, early losses, and occasional surprising longevity. And you find yourself curious about what comes next, like you're stepping from one pool of lamplight into the next, the darkness between them soft rather than threatening. You breathe, slow and calm, letting the edges of the medieval world blur. You hold on to one last thought. The scariest part of the past isn't necessarily the danger, it's the misunderstanding we carry into it. And as you stand here at the end of this first stretch of the journey, your footsteps already echoing into the next, you feel ready to wander deeper. You drift forward from the last lingering breath of that medieval village, and now you find yourself standing at the very edge of life, literally. You're hovering beside a mother in a cramped cottage, the air thick with smoke from a tiny hearth that refuses to warm the room. Her newborn rests in her arms, wrapped in linen so thin you can see pink skin peeking through. You feel the moment wobble, like a candle flame tested by a draft. You're watching a birth, but in the medieval world, a birth almost always shadows itself with the possibility of death. You steady yourself, letting the wooden floor creak under your imaginary weight. You notice how everyone in the room moves as though they're holding their breaths, because they basically are. Birth here is closer to a gamble than a celebration. You lean back against the rough plaster wall, inhaling that familiar mix of dampness, straw, and a hint of panic. You let yourself sink into the truth. This is where the medieval lifespan starts shrinking long before the person has a chance to take a second step, let alone a second year. You watch as the baby shivers. It's not dramatic, just a tiny tremor like a leaf reacting to a breeze. But you can't help thinking how fragile everything feels here. You remember how, earlier, you stepped through the idea of averages getting crushed by early deaths. Now you're standing right in that statistical ambush. Infant mortality wasn't a side note, it was the headline, the bold print, the thing that twisted the entire interpretation of how long people lived. You move closer to the midwife, who's wiping her hands on a faded apron. She's calm, but you can see the calculations happening behind her eyes. She's been here before, too many times. You kneel beside her and watch her inspect the baby. She taps the chest gently, listening to the breaths. You hold your own breath without even noticing. The mother finally exhales, a shaky sound that fills the room with raw relief. For now, the baby lives. But you sense everyone silently bracing for the next few days, because those days are the real test. You drift along with that fear, feeling it seep into your imagination like cold water. You wander outside the cottage, letting the chill slap your skin. You hear distant voices, children laughing, dogs barking, the thud of someone chopping firewood. Life goes on, but it does so with an undercurrent of quiet grief. You notice a row of small wooden markers outside the church. Some barely have names carved into them, just initials, or even symbols. You feel them tugging at you the way a soft wind pulls at a loose cloak. You take slow steps between the markers, brushing your fingers over the rough wood. You realize this. A medieval child faced dangers you wouldn't even think about. The water used to wash them. Questionable. The linens they slept in. Probably not clean by any modern standard. The air they breathed, thick with smoke or mold or whatever drifted in from the outdoors. You feel the weight of those first fragile years shaping the entire story of lifespan. You don't need someone to explain it. You can feel it, like the hum of a drum under your feet. A woman passes by carrying a bucket that looks too heavy for her frame. You step into her shoes for a second, imagining raising a child in a world where everything, from the air to the animals to the water to the food, posed a threat. You tilt your head, wondering how people manage the emotional whiplash of loving something so likely to vanish so soon. And yet, you spot children darting around the square, shrieking with joy, sticks in hand, playing some chaotic game with rules only they seem to understand. You smile. Even here, life insists on happening. You see one child, about 7 years old, racing toward a friend with all the reckless confidence in the world. You follow him, letting your feet crunch against the gravel. His grin is wide, missing a few teeth, sure, but undeniably full of life. You feel the truth rise in your chest. Make it to 7, 8, 9, and your odds improve dramatically. Childhood is the battlefield, adolescence is the prize. A quirky little detail catches you off guard. At the edge of the square, someone has hung a handful of carved wooden charms near a doorway. Tiny faces, tiny birds, even what looks like a smiling onion with eyes. You blink. A smiling onion. You lean in closer, amused at the bizarre little talisman. These charms, you realize, were believed to protect infants from evil spirits. You can't help but laugh softly, imagining someone earnestly hanging a goofy onion face charm to ward off sickness. It's strange, but in a world where medicine was more of a suggestion than a science, you take whatever hope you can get. Your gaze drifts to a cluster of women talking near a well. Their voices rise and fall like soft waves. One of them holds a toddler with a runny nose and drooping eyelids. You watch as she tries to calm the child, rocking gently, muttering a prayer under her breath. You step closer, curious. It hits you again. Illness wasn't a rare event. It was the background static of medieval life. A cough wasn't just a cough, it was a warning shot. You feel yourself absorbing that tension as if it's your own. As you walk around the scene, a scholar's voice slips into your thoughts, that familiar dusty-robed whisper reminding you that scholars still argue whether medieval people emotionally distanced themselves from infants to protect their hearts from early loss. You tilt your head, considering that cold possibility. But then you glance back at the mother in the cottage, the way she held her baby so tightly, so desperately, and you're not convinced. Love isn't good at following logic, especially when it's all you have. You wander toward the outskirts of the village, where the fields stretch out in long golden ribbons. The sun sits low on the horizon, making everything look softer, calmer, deceptively peaceful. You imagine a baby growing to toddlerhood out here, learning to walk on uneven dirt, learning to speak in the rhythm of birdsong and farm chores. You picture small hands touching wheat stalks, small feet chasing chickens, small voices mispronouncing every third word. You let the sweetness of that image warm your chest. But then you sense the flip side. One bad fever, one contaminated drink, one harsh winter storm sneaking through the cracks in a cottage roof, that's all it took. You imagine a mother waking in the night, hearing her child's breathing falter. You feel the panic ripple through your body like a cold wave. The harsh truth settles deeper. Medieval childhood was a tightrope strung over cliffs most families never stopped staring into. You follow a path leading to a shepherd tending his flock. A lanky boy, maybe 10, waves at you with a stick raised in mock warning. You wave back, amused at how fearless he seems. And then you realize something. Reaching age 10 was practically a victory parade. Children at that age were already working, already helping, already valuable to their families. You sense the pride their parents must have felt. You also feel a pang of guilt for every time you've complained about chores. As the shepherd boy whistles at a wandering sheep, you think of a mainstream fact drifting into your mind. Historians estimate that up to half of children in some medieval regions didn't survive to adulthood. You let that number land softly but firmly, like a stone placed deliberately on the ground. It's heavy, but it frames everything you've been wandering through. You breathe slowly, letting the number settle but not crush you. Along the path, you spot a midwife gathering herbs. You follow her, listening to the sound of clinking jars in her bag. She hums a tune that's oddly comforting. You watch her pick leaves and roots, muttering about protection, balance, warmth, things she believes help newborns survive the dangerous weeks. You let her presence soothe you, even if you know her tools are limited. You admire her determination, her commitment, her steady hands. It feels grounding. You drift back toward the heart of the village again, noticing how the sky has darkened. Smoke from chimneys rises in thin spirals, blending into the dusk. You hear children being called indoors, their laughter fading as doors creak shut. You follow the sound of distant singing, a lullaby, soft and low. You move toward it, drawn like a moth to lamplight. Inside another cottage, you see a father rocking a baby near the fireplace. You watch him pat the child's back, eyes heavy with exhaustion. He glances toward the fire, watching sparks rise and fade. You feel the tenderness in the room, the longing, the hope, the fear. It wraps around you like a shawl. You let yourself sink into that moment, imagining the rhythm of the father's rocking syncing with your own breath. You step back outside, the cold greeting you again. You look at the village as a whole, its people, its fragility, its stubborn insistence on living. You understand now, in a deeper way, how infant mortality sculpted the narrative of short lives. You feel the truth settle into your bones. Medieval people weren't dying at 30 because their bodies gave up, they were dying young because so many never made it out of childhood. And those who did often carried the emotional weight of those who didn't. You walk toward the edge of your imagined landscape, listening to the distant wind, the soft hoot of an owl, the faint bark of a dog. You take one last look over your shoulder at the village, the lights glowing through windows, the shadows stretching long, the quiet resilience breathing in every home. You feel yourself stepping into the next stretch of your journey, the ground steady under your feet, the story unfolding like a slow, calming exhale. You let the quiet of that village fade behind you, and now you wander toward the place where survival itself feels like a coin flip, a medieval well. You can almost hear the splash echoing up from the stone shaft before you even reach it. The air shifts, cooler, wetter, carrying that distinct mineral smell that tells you you're near water, or at least something pretending to be water. You take a slow breath, the kind people take when they're not sure whether they're about to drink or about to regret everything. And yeah, you're about to regret everything. You place your hands on the rough stone rim, leaning over just enough to see your own reflection wobble in the dark surface below. It feels like an omen. You watch a bucket descend, rope groaning like it's complaining about the job. A woman nearby, linen cap, tired eyes, pulls the rope hand over hand, muscles trembling under the strain. She doesn't think of microbes or parasites. She thinks only of getting enough water before sunset. You, on the other hand, are fully aware you're hovering over a medieval microbial rave. You wander a few steps back, taking in the scene. Chickens peck at the dirt nearby. A dog noses around the edge of the well, occasionally licking the stone. A child's sticky hands leave smudges exactly where they shouldn't. You feel a shiver that isn't from the cold. This is the kind of place where water carries secrets, none of them good. You watch someone dip a wooden ladle into a barrel filled from the well earlier. They drink. You wince. Your whole modern soul winces. You drift beside a small stream running just beyond the village. It looks clean, charming even, sunlight dancing on ripples like it's auditioning for a commercial. But you know better. Upstream, animals trample the banks, wading through muck. A farmer washes tools in it. Someone else dumps kitchen waste without a second thought. You kneel beside the water and touch the surface with your fingers. The cold stings, and your imagination fills in the rest. Invisible organisms dancing like they're celebrating your visit. You take a slow walk along the stream, watching it snake between trees. You notice a boy filling a jug, humming to himself, blissfully unaware that the harmless-looking trickle is a delivery system for some of the worst illnesses of the era. You feel the weight of that reality press against your skin like humidity. The truth settles in. The water problem was one of the biggest quiet killers in medieval life, a constant danger that everyone learned to ignore because what choice did they have? A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind like a lantern glow. In many places, drinking water from rivers and wells was so risky that people commonly turned to ale, yes, even children, as a safer option. You watch a tavern worker in your imagined world pour weak ale into mugs for workers heading out for the day. You can't help but smirk at the idea that the medieval version of stay hydrated involved alcohol. You take a phantom sip yourself, feeling that malty aroma drift around your senses. You walk toward the tavern's back door, where barrels are stacked like wooden giants. You note how brewing wasn't about getting buzzed, it was about surviving. The boiling and fermentation process killed off most pathogens. You run your hand along a barrel, feeling its slight warmth, and you appreciate how ingenuity grows from desperation. Still, you also imagine someone trying to drink responsibly in a world where the water could kill them. You chuckle softly at the irony. A quirky detail slips into view. Tucked behind one of the barrels, you spot a wooden ladle etched with a tiny carved duck, cross-eyed, goofy-looking. You blink, amused. You can almost hear some medieval brewer saying, "Yeah, the duck keeps the bad spirits away." You tilt your head. Sure, why not? You're surrounded by dangers. You'd carve a protective duck too. As you step away from the tavern, your thoughts darken slightly. You picture someone succumbing to dysentery or cholera, their strength sapped quickly, like water slipping through fingers. You imagine a family desperately seeking herbs, prayers, anything. And yet, even in their grief, the water remains unavoidable. You feel that cruel loop wrapping around you, tightening like a drawn bowstring. Moving deeper into this imagined world, you find yourself in another village entirely, this one nestled beside a marsh. The smell hits you first, a murky blend of rot and stagnant air. You step lightly, half expecting the ground to swallow your boots. People here live with constant humidity, constant insects, constant whispers of illness floating over the reeds. You watch a girl fill a bucket from a marshy pool. The water looks like it's hiding things, bits of grass, flecks of mud, tiny ripples from creatures beneath the surface. You feel your throat tense up just watching. But this is what they have. You sense how exhaustion can numb fear, how survival can force people to normalize the unthinkable. You let that feeling sit heavy in your chest. You wander through the marsh village and notice a healer's hut with herbs hanging from the rafters. You step inside, inhaling scents of rosemary, sage, and something bitter you can't identify. The healer, old, wiry, eyes sharp as a hawk, waves a bundle of dried leaves over a pot of boiling water. You approach slowly, listening to her mutter protections against tainted water spirits. You raise an eyebrow, amused but also weirdly touched. You wonder how many lives she's tried to save. You give her a silent nod, acknowledging the effort even if the science wasn't all there. Then, as if on cue, the dusty-robed scholar voice returns in your mind, whispering that scholars still argue whether medieval people genuinely understood waterborne illness or simply observed patterns without linking cause and effect. You feel that unresolved tension flutter against your thoughts. You know they weren't clueless, but the puzzle pieces available to them were faded, incomplete, frustrating. You let that academic uncertainty hang in the air like the lingering smell of herbs. You step out of the hut and let the marsh wind cool your face. You watch a few villagers hauling water, their movements slow but practiced. You feel the rhythm of their day settle into you, the repetition, the caution, the acceptance. You picture how trust in water wasn't confidence, it was resignation. You imagine the quiet fear behind every sip, every ladle dipped, every pot filled. Your feet take you next to a larger settlement, one with stone channels designed to carry water. Through the center of town. You walk along one of the channels, leaning over to see the flow, fast, clear, deceptively pure. You watch women washing clothes, children flicking water at each other, men rinsing tools after work. For a moment, it feels civilized, advanced. But then you see a butcher nearby dumping scraps into the very same channel. The water carries everything downstream without discrimination. You raise a hand to your temple, feeling the sudden headache of it all. Sanitation wasn't yet a concept, it was a luxury of hindsight. You drizzle your fingers into the water again, feeling the false promise of cleanliness. You walk past a baker's shop, the smell of warm bread offering a brief, welcome sweetness to cut through the grim reality of contaminated water. A boy runs out carrying a loaf almost half his size. You smile as he stumbles, recovering with a grin. Life persists. It always does. You hold on to that thought with surprising tenderness. As twilight deepens, you wander along the outer rim of the settlement, watching villagers collect the last of the day's water. You stand beside one, feeling the heaviness of their bucket echo in your own arms. You imagine how every drop they carry contains a risk they've learned to ignore. You think about how trust becomes muscle memory when survival depends on it. You sit on a worn stone step, letting the cool evening surround you. The sounds of the day soften into a nighttime hush. You reflect on the truth you've been walking through. Water wasn't the giver of life in the medieval world, it was a roll of the dice. You let that realization drift through your mind, slow and calming, like the flow of a stream you wouldn't dare drink from. You stand again, stretching your shoulders, ready to wander further. The path ahead feels dim but steady, carrying you toward the next layer of this old world's dangers and quiet resilience. You ease forward from the memory of that risky water, and your footsteps now carry you into a landscape that feels heavier, emptier, and strangely quiet. You sense it before you see it, the tension in the air, the brittle edges of survival. You wander into a patchwork of fields where the soil looks tired, like it's been asked to give too much for too long. You kneel, letting the dirt sift through your fingers, and the truth hits you softly but firmly. Hunger wasn't an event here. Hunger was a season, a cycle, a neighbor that never minded overstaying its welcome. You walk between rows of stunted crops, the stalks bending under a sigh of wind, and you feel your stomach clench in sympathy with people who lived century after century with the constant threat of famine. It wasn't dramatic most of the time, not the earth cracking open in disaster movie style, but subtle, persistent erosion. Slightly smaller harvests, slightly fewer meals, slightly weaker bodies. You feel that, slightly, building like a quiet pressure behind your ribs. A farmer trudges past you, carrying a hoe over his shoulder. His back is bent from a lifetime of wrestling with this soil. You follow him as he surveys his field with the heavy look of someone trying to decide if hope is worth the effort. The wind kicks up dust around your feet, and you let it swirl around you, settling into your clothes like a reminder that everything in this world returns to the earth sooner than later. You drift closer to the barn beside his home, the door half open and creaking. Inside, you see grain stored in sacks, so few of them. You touch one, pressing your fingers into the burlap. The sack slumps inward like something exhaling its last breath. You understand immediately why families rationed everything. You imagine the conversations whispered in the dark. Not tonight, save some for winter, just a little less. You feel the ache of those words settle into the room. You wander toward the village granary next, following the sound of wooden carts rumbling over uneven ground. You see people gathering, measuring out their portions for the day. Some walk away carrying modest amounts. Others walk away empty-handed, eyes avoiding everyone else. You hover there, letting the emotional gravity tug you down. You sense how hunger didn't just weaken bodies, it twisted relationships, reshaped families, rewrote futures. A mainstream historical fact slips into your thoughts. In many medieval regions, a single bad harvest could cause food shortages for an entire year. You let that idea echo around you like a low hum. You see it play out in the anxious faces of the villagers. You feel it in the way they move, carefully, quietly, with an unspoken understanding that there's never enough. You walk along a path lined with wild grasses, noting how people sometimes survived on whatever edible plants they could forage. You kneel beside a patch of sorrel, plucking a leaf and rubbing it between your fingers. You imagine someone doing the same centuries ago, praying it would fill the emptiness, even for a moment. You glance toward the woods, picturing families gathering nuts, berries, roots, anything. You notice the tired patience on their faces and feel it mirrored in your own breath. And then a quirky detail catches your eye near a cottage window. Hanging from a beam is a dried-out fish head with a crude smile painted on it. You raise an eyebrow. Someone clearly believed this good luck fish would encourage plenty in the coming season. You can't help but chuckle softly. You imagine someone painting that silly little grin late one night, muttering, "Well, it can't make things worse." You walk on, letting the moment lighten the air a bit before the weight settles again. You follow a narrow dirt path to a cluster of families sitting together near a communal oven. The smell of bread drifts toward you, warm, soft, comforting, and painfully rare. You watch as a woman pulls out a loaf, scarfing the steam rising off it like it's a blessing. She slices the loaf into thin pieces, each cut deliberate, measured. You feel your chest tighten at the precision in her hands. This bread needs to stretch. Everything needs to stretch. A child leans against her, eyes round with anticipation. You see her break off a tiny piece and hand it over. The child's face brightens instantly. You realize you're watching a battle between scarcity and tenderness is fighting like hell to win. You step away from the warm glow of the oven and wander toward the outskirts of the village, where the land slopes upward to a hill. From the top, you look down at the fields, patches of brown, green, gold, and see them like a patchy quilt someone stitched together in desperation. You breathe in the cold wind, and it carries the quiet truth: the land didn't care. The land gave what it could, and sometimes what it could give was heartbreak. As dusk paints the sky in muted colors, you wander into another imagined moment, a lonely shepherd guarding a few scrawny sheep. You watch him poke the ground with his staff, frustrated. The grass barely reaches his ankles. You gaze at the sheep, ribs faintly visible under their wool. You feel that same vulnerability flicker inside you. Hunger wasn't just a physical sensation, it was a tether, tying everyone to the whims of weather, soil, and chance. A distant voice, your inner scholar again, whispers that scholars still argue whether medieval crop failures were worsened by early climate fluctuations or farming methods that exhausted soil over time. You tilt your head, nodding slightly. Even the experts squint at this part of history. You let the debate swirl around. You like a drifting cloud. You wander onward, down a road where you see a family traveling with a small cart. Their possessions are piled high: clothes, tools, sacks that clink like there's barely anything inside. They're moving because the land failed them. You stand beside them as they trudge forward, their steps slow, deliberate. You sense the grief under their determination. You watch the mother look back once, just once, at the place they're leaving behind. You feel that ache in your own throat. Night settles, thick and quiet. You follow the glow of torches back toward the village, letting the soft light guide you. You hear someone inside a cottage whispering a prayer for the next day's meals, and the sound wraps around you, gentle and weary. You sit beside a dying hearth for a moment, the embers glowing faintly like tired eyes. You think about the people who lived like this, constantly chasing enough food to stay alive. You think about how the real reason medieval people died young isn't just one story, it's dozens of small stories braided together. And this hunger, this constant, background ache, is one of the thickest threads. You rise again, stepping back into the cool night. You feel the hunger of the past recede behind you, but its echo stays, a reminder of how fragile life could be when nature held all the cards. And with quiet footsteps, you wander into the next stretch of this long, shadowed journey. You step away from the hungry fields and feel the air shift again, this time with a sterile sharpness that doesn't belong in nature at all. You wander toward a small timber-framed building with a faded symbol painted above the doorway, something vaguely resembling a hand, a bowl, or maybe a disfigured lemon. It's hard to tell. Whatever it's meant to be, it signals healing, or at least someone's best attempt at it. You pause at the door, your fingers brushing over the rough wood, and you sense that inside this place, healing often meant good luck, hope you survive. You breathe slowly, letting the uneasy anticipation settle into your shoulders. You step through the doorway and into a room that smells like herbs, smoke, old sweat, and a hint of fear. The kind of fear that lingers in corners like dust the broom keeps missing. A narrow table sits in the center, if you can call it that. It's really just a plank balanced between two barrels. You feel the faintest twinge of sympathy for whoever lies on it next. You walk inside, your footsteps soft, surveying the tools arranged nearby. Metal instruments that look more like blacksmith leftovers than anything medical, dried plants hanging in bunches, little jars filled with mysterious powders. Your eyes catch on a pair of forceps, massive, rust-speckled, intimidating. You feel your spine tighten. Someone used that on someone. And someone will again. You exhale slowly, easing into the reality that medieval medicine wasn't malicious, it was just trying. Trying in the dark. Trying with the wrong tools. Trying with the wrong theories. But still trying. You notice movement in the corner. A physician, or at least the closest thing this village has to one, dressed in layered, worn robes and carrying an expression caught somewhere between confidence and panic. He reaches for a mortar and pestle, grinding herbs as if the vigor alone might create a miracle. You watch him work, the sound of grinding echoing through the room like a heartbeat. You lean against the wall, observing the concentration etched onto his face. Then he says something aloud, something about humors being unbalanced, and you almost hear your modern mind sigh. You wander closer, listening as he explains to a distressed woman that her husband's illness is the result of too much black bile. You tilt your head, and a tiny, sarcastic voice inside you mutters, "Of course. Obviously." You don't say it out loud. You just let the thought drift. You follow the woman into the next room where her husband lies on a straw mattress, pale and sweating. The physician positions himself like someone who's about to perform a grand performance or a very risky guess. You watch him take a knife, not sharp enough by your standards, far too sharp for the husband's comfort, and begin a process that makes your stomach tighten, bloodletting. You've wandered right into the medieval equivalent of, turn it off and on again. The physician nicks the man's arm. Blood beads, then flows. You feel your pulse quicken, even though it's not your arm. The physician nods to himself like he's accomplished something profound. You shake your head softly, eyes narrowing with sleepy disbelief. The man's wife clasps her hands, whispering prayers. You feel that hope wrap around you, the same hope that made these treatments seem logical back then. When the world is unpredictable and terrifying, even wrong answers can feel like lifelines. A mainstream historical fact slips gently into the room with you. Bloodletting was one of the most common medical treatments across Europe for centuries, often used for everything from fevers to headaches to general imbalances. You let that fact settle, watching the physician wipe his blade on a cloth that definitely needed replacing 3 patients ago. You feel the reality settle into your body like a weight. Medieval medicine didn't just fail sometimes, it often made things worse. Much worse. You step back, letting the scene blur, and wander into a small side room where jars line the shelves. You squint, reading faded markings. Some jars hold crushed herbs, mint, sage, yarrow. Others hold powders that look suspiciously like ground bark or, worse, dried insects. And then, on a high shelf, you spot a jar containing what might be. No, you blink, yep, that's a single preserved frog. Floating, limp, pale. A quirky detail breaks through the heaviness. Someone painted a tiny smiling face on the jar, maybe in an attempt to make the frog look friendly. It doesn't. At all. But you appreciate the effort. You imagine someone thinking, this will cheer up the sick, while ignoring the fact that frog-based remedies almost never cheered anyone up. You wander deeper into the clinic, drawn by the sound of someone coughing violently. In a shadowy corner, a man sits hunched over, a cloth pressed to his lips. You move closer and see streaks of red on the fabric. Tuberculosis. Consumption. The old killer with a polite name but merciless habits. You watch as the healer approaches him with a concoction of honey, herbs, and heated wine. The man drinks, wincing, but grateful. You feel your heart tug with the recognition that even in the absence of real cures, comfort mattered. You observe the healer whisper a charm under his breath, tracing a symbol in the air above the man's chest. You raise a sleepy eyebrow. The line between medicine and magic was thin back then, almost non-existent. And honestly, you kind of like how earnest the whole ritual feels. People have always needed to believe in something, especially when their bodies betray them. Your scholar voice slips in again, dusty and low, murmuring that scholars still argue whether some medieval medical practices, particularly herbal remedies, were actually ineffective or simply applied inconsistently. You nod slowly. Not everything was disastrous. Some herbs genuinely helped. Some poultices soothed. Some potions eased pain. The tragedy wasn't the lack of knowledge, it was the unpredictable nature of what worked and what didn't. You drift toward a window, peering out into the gray afternoon light. Across the village square, you see a woman leading a small child toward the healer's hut. The child limps, clutching their side. You follow them outside, letting the crisp air brush your face. The healer examines the child, listens to the mother's frantic whispers, and prescribes something that makes you press your lips together, powdered bone mixed with vinegar. You watch the child choke it down, grimacing. You exhale softly, knowing that even good intentions couldn't protect people from treatments that did more harm than the illnesses themselves. You wander to the far side of the village where a small crowd huddles around an injured blacksmith. His arm is badly burned. You watch the healer arrive with ointments made from animal fat and herbs. That part actually seems reasonable, even compassionate. But then he takes a heated iron tool, yes, heated, and presses it lightly near the wound to seal in the healing spirit. You wince. The blacksmith winces. Everyone winces. The healer nods approvingly. You breathe through the discomfort, letting the smoke curl around you like a reluctant hug. As the evening stretches into dusk, you find yourself drawn toward a quiet cottage where an elderly woman serves as the local herbalist. Her methods are gentler, her demeanor softer. You step inside, inhaling the scent of lavender and rosemary. She moves with practiced ease, grinding herbs with steady hands, humming a lullaby under her breath. You watch her tend to a young girl with a fever, placing a cool cloth on her forehead, offering a tea that smells soothing even to you. You relax slightly. Not all healing hurt. A cat weaves through the herbalist's legs, a scruffy creature with one ear missing. You kneel, rubbing its head. It purrs loudly, unimpressed by your presence but willing to accept affection. The herbalist chuckles, telling the girl that the cat protects the home from bad spirits. You smile softly. You're seeing the heart of medieval medicine now, the mix of desperation, superstition, genuine care, wild guesses, and occasional brilliance. You step outside into the cool night air again, letting the stars sprinkle across the sky like grains poured from a sack. You imagine walking through this world with a body constantly vulnerable and only limited help available. You feel a quiet admiration for those who kept trying anyway, for the healers, the herbalists, the midwives, the caretakers who held hands and wiped brows even when their tools failed them. You walk through the village square, lanterns flickering, shadows stretching long. You pause beside a well, not the dangerous one from before but another with a carved wooden bucket resting beside it. You think about how survival in this era wasn't just about avoiding plague or famine, it was about dodging the very people trying to save you. Not out of malice, but because knowledge moves slower than hope. You take one more slow breath, letting the night settle around you like a heavy cloak. And as you step forward, leaving the healer's world behind, you feel a quiet respect for the resilience of everyone who lived with these risks, and a soft shiver at the thought of what waits ahead in this long, shadowed journey. You drift away from that dim little healer's hut, your feet carrying you down a narrow path that somehow feels colder than the night around it. You don't see anything unusual at first. Just cottages, lanterns, the quiet shuffle of a village settling into its evening routines. But as you wander a little farther, the air thickens. The wind stops. Even the dogs seem to hush. You know something is wrong long before you see it. You wander into a square where a single cart sits alone under the flicker of torchlight. Its wooden wheels are spattered with something dark that isn't mud. You don't need anyone to tell you what this cart does. You already feel it in your spine, in that uneasy tingle behind your ears. This is the plague cart, the grim collector of a reality too heavy for anyone to face in daylight. You step closer, as if pulled by a force your brain is too tired to resist. The cart is empty now, but it doesn't feel empty. The echo of what it carried clings to the air like a whisper someone forgot to finish. You trail your fingers along the rough wood and feel every splinter like a tiny scream. You can almost hear the wheels creaking through narrow streets, the call nobody wants to answer. You swallow slowly. You wander deeper. The village looks the same at a glance, and yet you notice the subtle signs immediately. The shuttered windows, the smoke rising from chimneys that burn just a little hotter than usual, as if people are trying to cleanse the air. You notice a bucket of herbs smoldering by a doorway, filling the street with a bitter, hopeful scent. Someone believes it helps. Someone needs to believe it helps. And as you breathe that sharp herbal smoke, a mainstream historical fact settles into your thoughts. During plague outbreaks, entire towns could lose a third or even half of their population in a matter of months. You let that number sit, heavy and cold, like a stone in your palm. You look around at this imagined village and try to picture half of it erased. You can't. And yet you also can, because the silence here already feels halfway to that. You wander toward a home where a single candle flickers behind a shutter. You sense worry before you even approach the door. Inside, a family gathers around a bed. A man lies there, his breath shallow and uneven. His skin glistens with fever. His neck shows swelling where it shouldn't. Those dark, terrifying buboes. You feel your throat tighten. You don't want to step closer, but you do. Something pulls you in like a soft, dreadful gravity. The healer you met earlier enters the cottage, clutching bundles of herbs, holy symbols, and a piece of cloth he presses over his mouth. You watch as he tries everything he can think of, burning rosemary, whispering prayers, pressing poultices onto swollen skin. Nothing helps. Nothing can. The family clings to hope anyway, because hope is the only medicine they have left. You back away from the scene, your heart beating slowly but heavily, like it's trudging through mud. You wander down the street, noticing how people avoid each other now, not out of rudeness, but out of fear wrapped in love. You pass one woman leaving food outside the door of her elderly neighbor. She doesn't knock. She just walks away quickly, her hands trembling. You feel the heartbreak in that distance, the helplessness of wanting to help but fearing the price. As you move deeper into the village, you overhear a tense conversation between two men. One insists the plague came from poisoned air. The other swears it came from sin. They argue in low, desperate voices. You tilt your head, listening as the dusty-robed scholar inside your mind murmurs that scholars still argue whether medieval reactions to plague were primarily religious, scientific, or simply chaotic improvisations. You nod slightly. It always comes back to incomplete information crashing into overwhelming fear. You follow the men until they reach the edge of town, where a small hill overlooks fields that seem painfully peaceful in contrast. There, you spot a group burying a body hastily. They work quickly, mechanically, keeping their distance even as they dig. You notice they don't say the name aloud. Not because they don't remember it, but because speaking feels dangerous right now, like the air itself might carry grief as contagion. You stand beside the grave, letting the cold settle into your bones. A faint rattle draws your attention back toward the road. The plague cart rolls through again, empty now, but ready. You watch two men approach a doorway where a cloth marked with a crude red X hangs. They pull the door open slowly, with dread carved into their posture. You turn your face away for a moment, because even in this imagined journey, some things are too real to watch. When you wander back toward the center of the village, you catch sight of a group gathered around a fire. They're trying to burn herbs to purify the air. The smoke rises thick and fragrant, cloaking the moment in a surreal, half-comforting haze. A child peeks out from behind her mother's shawl, eyes wide with confusion. You kneel beside her in your mind, offering a silent, impossible reassurance. She doesn't see you, but somehow the gesture still softens the edges of the scene. A quirky detail pops up when you notice a carved wooden charm dangling from the mother's wrist, a little figure shaped like a dancing goat with a lopsided grin. You blink. You weren't expecting that. You can't help but smirk softly. Even now, someone believed this goofy goat would bring luck, or safety, or strength. And honestly, in a world this uncertain, you might have worn it too. You slip away from the fire and wander into the woods just beyond the village. The sounds of fear fade behind you, slowly, reluctantly. The trees stand tall and still, their branches woven like protective hands. You feel the calmness there, deceptive but welcome. You walk along a narrow trail until you reach a small clearing where a solitary figure kneels in prayer. A traveling monk. You watch him whisper words into the night, his voice barely louder than a breeze. He carries a small satchel of relics, tiny bones wrapped in cloth, a smooth stone carved with a cross, a withered piece of something that might once have been a flower. You watch him press these items to his chest with a trembling hand. He wants protection. He wants answers. He wants meaning in all this loss. You stand quietly beside him, understanding that desire in a way that feels almost too intimate. You wander back toward the village as dawn begins to smudge the edge of the sky. People emerge cautiously, as if expecting the air to bite. They check on neighbors from a distance. They retrieve water carefully. They whisper about new fevers, new symptoms. You watch them navigate the morning with faces carved from equal parts exhaustion and stubbornness. You feel something shift inside you. This isn't just death. It's the heavy shadow of unpredictability, the sense that danger could touch anyone at any time for reasons no one understands. You wander through that feeling slowly, letting it stretch out like a quiet, cold fog. As you walk past the plague cart one last time, you trail your fingers along the wheel. The wood feels cold, stiff, worn from too many journeys. You inhale softly, exhaling even softer. And when you finally step away from the cart, the air opens around you again. Not brighter, not safer, but clearer. You feel the dread loosen, and a new path unfurls under your feet, leading you deeper into the long story of how people kept surviving even when the world gave them every reason not to. You wander forward, leaving the cart behind, letting the fear fade just enough for the next truth to rise. You leave the plague's shadow behind, but the air still carries a weight, a lingering reminder that survival in medieval times was never simple. You wander down a cobbled street that twists between tall, uneven houses. The walls lean in close, as if sharing secrets they've held for centuries. You can hear faint sounds inside. A baby's cry, a hammer striking metal, someone humming a tune meant to drown out worry. You step lightly, not wanting to disturb the quiet rhythm of lives so fragile yet stubbornly persistent. Your feet take you toward a small market square where the remnants of the day's trade linger. You see baskets half empty, stray vegetables rolling lazily across the stones, and a few chickens pecking at crumbs. You kneel to pick up a carrot, imagining its journey from the field to this moment. You feel the hunger of the land itself, how every crop was a gamble, every harvest a fragile victory. Hunger and disease may have stalked them relentlessly, but still, people moved, bartered, and dared to eat, because life demanded it. A woman calls out from a stall, holding up a small bundle of herbs. You step closer and watch her demonstrate a poultice for wounds, offering a bit of instruction to a young boy who listens with rapt attention. Her voice is soft but steady, a calm in the chaos of a world that often punished carelessness. You notice her hands, calloused, precise, confident. You imagine the countless small injuries she's tended to: burns, cuts, splinters, bites. You sense her power in that quiet expertise, the subtle authority of survival passed down through touch and repetition. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. Medieval markets weren't just centers of trade, they were hubs for information, gossip, and practical knowledge. You let that thought linger, imagining villagers exchanging remedies and warnings alongside radishes and wool. Each conversation, each barter, was a thread in the invisible web of survival. You watch a boy show another how to tie a small bandage, a woman demonstrates cleaning a wound. Even these tiny exchanges feel monumental in a world without modern hospitals or medicine. You drift toward the town's blacksmith, drawn by the clanging rhythm of hammer on iron. Sparks fly with each strike, briefly illuminating the dark, soot-stained interior. You watch the blacksmith's face glisten with sweat, his muscles coiled with purpose. You imagine that even the most ordinary day, repairing tools, forging nails, shoeing horses, was a battle against time, hunger, and misfortune. You feel a subtle tension in your chest as you witness the strength required just to maintain life, not enhance it. A quirky detail makes you chuckle softly. Pinned to the blacksmith's wall is a faded drawing of a dragon, crudely sketched by a child who likely watched him work every day. You can almost hear someone in the crowd whisper, "This dragon protects the forge," as if humor and superstition could ward off accidents or illness. You smile, imagining how small rituals like this eased fear and created a sense of control in a world that often offered none. You wander past the smithy into a narrow alley, where you spot a tiny, makeshift pharmacy of sorts. Jars of herbs and powders line a rickety shelf outside a window. A man sits cross-legged nearby, crushing dried flowers into a bowl. You kneel beside him and watch. He measures, stirs, and murmurs quietly, almost rhythmically, as if the words themselves carried magic. You sense the delicate balance of hope and desperation that defined the medieval approach to health. The dusty scholar inside your mind murmurs again that scholars still argue whether herbal remedies truly cured ailments or if their effectiveness was mostly placebo, but you let the uncertainty hang in the air, knowing that even small relief mattered when nothing else could. You watch villagers purchase these remedies. A pinch of thyme for a cough, a dab of honey for a fever, a leaf pressed to a burn. Each transaction is a tiny act of trust, of hope. You leave the alley and follow a faint trail toward the outskirts of town, where a shallow river glimmers under the setting sun. Children wade in its edges, laughing softly, oblivious to the dangers that lurk. Upstream, you pause to watch, the laughter weaving through your mind like fragile threads of joy in a tapestry heavy with loss. You feel a moment of relief wash over you, the gentle reminder that life persists, even in precarious times. A sudden cough behind you reminds you of the ever-present threat of illness. You glance back to see a man clutching his chest, staggering. You step closer instinctively but remember the lessons from earlier. Proximity was a gamble. You breathe out slowly, letting the distance maintain safety, and notice a woman with a small bundle of herbs approach him cautiously. The ritual of care unfolds again, softly, carefully, persistently. You wander along the riverbank as twilight deepens. The shadows stretch long, and the air grows cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and water. You reflect on the delicate balance medieval people maintained every day: labor, hunger, disease, superstition, and occasional joy. Every small act, fetching water, tending animals, trading goods, applying herbs, was a dance with fate. You let that rhythm lull your thoughts, carrying a mixture of awe and melancholy. You pause on a small wooden bridge, looking down at the water below. You notice how it glints softly, almost inviting, yet you remember the countless dangers it hides. And you feel a profound connection to those who lived by such waters, who drew life from the same currents that could just as easily take it away. You imagine the countless moments of courage, endurance, and quiet bravery that passed without note or recognition. Finally, you leave the bridge behind, following the path that curves toward a cluster of cottages at the far edge of the village. The torches flicker and shadows play across the walls, softening the sharp edges of the day. You feel the weight of the medieval world, but also the resilience that carried people forward. Every cautious step, every careful act, every whispered prayer or charm, they were threads in a tapestry woven against adversity. And as you wander into the approaching night, the village seems to exhale softly, letting you carry a fraction of its history in your mind. You feel the rhythm of survival settle around you, and you take one deep, slow breath, knowing the journey is far from over. You leave the river behind, stepping onto a winding path that leads you into the shadowy outskirts of the village. The air here feels heavier, thicker, tinged with the sense of wood smoke, damp straw, and something metallic you can't place. Your feet crunch over dried leaves and stray twigs, and every sound seems magnified: the distant crow of a rooster, the scuff of a boot, the faint drip of water from a leaky roof. You feel a strange mix of curiosity and caution, as if the land itself is watching, judging your next step. Ahead, a small chapel emerges from the twilight. Its stone walls are streaked with moss, and the wooden doors sag slightly on rusted hinges. You push one open and step inside, and the dim glow of candles flickers across pews that have been worn smooth by generations of hands. The air smells of wax and incense, faint but persistent. You realize that for many medieval people, faith wasn't just belief, it was survival, a kind of emotional medicine in a world full of unpredictable dangers. You wander to the front of the chapel, where a priest kneels beside a frail figure on the floor. The man's breathing is shallow, and his hands twitch slightly as if trying to hold onto something intangible. The priest whispers prayers, pressing a small relic to the man's chest. You watch, feeling that mix of awe and sorrow that comes from witnessing desperation and hope tangled together. The medieval world often relied on rituals and faith where medicine and science could not reach. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. During outbreaks of disease, medieval clergy often served as both spiritual guides and caretakers, sometimes exposing themselves to illness to provide comfort. You let that settle like a weight in your chest. You picture all the unseen acts of courage, small and large, that helped people endure a world stacked against them. You drift toward a side aisle where children huddle near a heater, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. You notice one boy holding a carved wooden cross, fingers tracing the edges over and over. He doesn't speak, but his focus is absolute. You imagine him feeling that object as a shield, a tether to some certainty in a life defined by uncertainty. You feel a quiet admiration for that focus, that instinctual need for protection. Then a quirky detail draws your attention. A small, hand-painted mural behind the altar shows angels riding oversized rabbits, wielding tiny swords. You blink. You can't decide whether it's a cautionary tale, a whimsical joke, or a fevered artistic choice, but somehow, it feels exactly right for this world. You chuckle softly. In a place so full of suffering, even absurd humor has its place, its power to soften the relentless tension of life. You wander to the back of the chapel, noticing a pile of crude wooden coffins stacked like firewood. The sight is quieting, unnerving, yet strangely ordinary. You sense the inevitable rhythm of life and death pressing down. You realize that for people of this era, proximity to mortality wasn't shocking, it was normal. Death wasn't always a tragedy, sometimes, it was just the next step in a sequence they had no control over. The dusty scholar inside your mind murmurs again, whispering that scholars still argue whether medieval religious practices actually affected survival rates or primarily offered psychological relief. You let the uncertainty linger like incense curling through the air. Regardless of theory, you feel the deep human need to seek comfort, to give meaning, and to resist despair. Stepping outside, the air feels different. The night has grown cooler, carrying the scent of pine and wet soil. You follow a narrow trail leading to a small cemetery behind the chapel, the ground uneven, graves simple and worn by wind and rain. You pause at a fresh mound, the soil still loose, a simple wooden cross marking the space. You feel the hush of grief here, the collective memory of lives touched by hunger, disease, and hardship. You wander past the graves, letting your fingers brush against the low stones. You sense the patience of generations, people who lived with constant risk and loss, who carried on because endurance was the only choice. You feel a soft melancholy mixed with awe. This wasn't just survival, it was resilience refined under pressure, as quiet and persistent as the wind through the trees. A child's laughter drifts from the village beyond, startling in its brightness. You follow the sound and find a small group of kids chasing a wooden hoop, sticks tapping rhythmically against the cobblestones. You smile, realizing that even amid illness and hunger, life continued with small, joyful acts. The world, despite its dangers, still offered moments of brightness, however fleeting. You pause to watch the children, their faces glowing in torchlight, and feel an odd sense of calm. You think about how medieval people clung to such fleeting joys, celebrating harvest festivals, sharing stories, playing simple games, to survive the relentless pressures of life. You let that sense of continuity wrap around you like a soft blanket, easing the tension in your chest. Finally, you step back onto the path, leaving the chapel and cemetery behind. The night is calm, almost tender now, though you know danger still lingers. You take a slow, steady breath, feeling the rhythm of medieval life, with all its fragility and determination, settle around you. And as you walk toward the next stretch of your journey, you carry with you the quiet resilience of those who endured, step by careful step, in a world that demanded nothing less. You wander out of the quiet village, leaving the chapel and cemetery behind, stepping onto a rough dirt road that winds into open fields. The moon hangs low, spilling silver across tall grasses that sway like a restless sea. You feel the night brushing against your skin, cool and whispering, carrying scents of wet earth, wildflowers, and something faintly metallic, perhaps the trace of blood or iron from far-off work. The world feels vast now, empty in the right way, yet alive with tiny movements. A fox dashing across the field, the rustle of an owl in the treetops, the faint flicker of lanterns in distant windows. As you walk, your mind drifts to the people who lived here centuries ago, moving through this same terrain. Every step you take seems to echo theirs, not just in distance, but in survival instinct. They were vigilant, always calculating the threat of predators, disease, or misfortune. You almost stumble over a small mound in the grass, realizing it marks a grave. You pause, brushing your fingers over the weathered stone. There's no name, no date, just a simple cross etched roughly, as if the maker wanted to honor a life, but time and hardship had eroded the details. You feel a pang of empathy, sensing the quiet dignity in remembering even when all else fades. You continue along the path, passing a small stream. The water glints in the moonlight, moving steadily despite rocks and fallen branches. You kneel, letting the cool flow run over your fingers. You imagine medieval villagers relying on this very water for drinking, washing, and sometimes, desperate attempts at healing. You see the footprints of people and animals along the banks, the muddy impressions whispering stories of necessity, care, and occasional recklessness. A mainstream historical fact rises to the surface of your thoughts. Contaminated water was a major cause of disease in medieval towns, often more deadly than any visible threat. You feel that silent danger ripple beneath the tranquil surface of the stream. You imagine families drawing water carefully, teaching children which springs were safe, and improvising when luck or knowledge ran thin. Even with care, illness was always lurking, a quiet shadow in every bucket and cup. You wander further, entering a patch of forest where the trees form a dense, protective canopy. Darkness falls thicker here, broken only by the occasional glimmer of moonlight reflecting off wet leaves. You feel the presence of life all around. Small creatures skittering, birds roosting silently, and the steady rhythm of the wind through branches. There's a kind of nervous serenity here, a reminder that the wild could provide and take away in equal measure. A quirky detail catches your eye. A small, hollowed-out tree trunk stuffed with tiny carved wooden figurines. They depict people, animals, and oddly, a few dragons. You crouch, letting a sleepy chuckle escape. You imagine a child, or perhaps a lonely adult, placing these figures here as guardians, small tokens against fear and uncertainty. In a world where danger stalked every corner, even tiny rituals mattered. You tuck the moment into your memory like a soft pebble of light amid the darkness. You follow a narrow animal trail that snakes deeper into the woods, noticing signs of human habitation, shoes abandoned near the water, a tattered cloak caught on a branch, faint smoke rising in the distance. You approach cautiously, feeling the pulse of a village, invisible to the main road. Here, survival feels rawer, quieter, more personal. Families living at the edge of society, relying on ingenuity, herbal knowledge, and sheer stubbornness to endure. You peek into a small clearing where a family sits around a fire. The father tends to a pot of soup, the mother mends clothing, and a child sits on a log, tracing patterns in the dirt. You watch as they exchange stories quietly, laughter threading through the tension of their lives. Even in hardship, life persists. Small rituals, shared meals, tales, songs, soften the edges of survival. You inhale the smoke, letting it carry warmth and understanding through your own senses. A scholarly whisper drifts into your mind. Scholars still argue whether these small communal practices, sharing meals, storytelling, informal childcare, significantly affected survival rates, or merely soothe the soul. You consider it as you watch the family, realizing that sometimes mental resilience mattered as much as physical health. You feel the quiet power of connection and human ingenuity, the tools they wielded invisibly alongside hammers, herbs, and fire. You wander past the firelight, deeper into the woods, until you reach a quiet glade. The moon illuminates a patch of wildflowers, their petals trembling in the breeze. You kneel to touch them, the sensation delicate and fleeting. You imagine someone centuries ago stopping here to breathe, to collect herbs, or simply to rest, aware that moments of beauty were rare and fiercely cherished. As you rise, a distant howl makes you pause. You startle but then relax, realizing it's part of the rhythm of the forest. Danger remains present, yes, but so does life, constant and stubborn. You step forward, feeling the path underfoot, the whisper of the wind, and the quiet pulse of existence around you. Every sense feels alert, yet calm, as if the woods themselves are teaching endurance through observation. Finally, you leave the forest behind, emerging onto a small hill. The village lies below, bathed in the soft glow of dawn. Smoke spirals from chimneys, children's laughter drifts faintly, and the day begins anew. You take a slow breath, letting the panorama sink in. The medieval world, with all its threats, sorrows, and tiny joys, stretches beneath you. You feel a connection, fragile but persistent, to those who lived, survived, and found moments of grace amid constant uncertainty. And as you step down toward the village, your thoughts settle into a quiet rhythm, a soft acknowledgement of the strength threaded through centuries of ordinary, relentless life. You follow the sunrise as it spills golden light across the village rooftops, warming the cobblestones and brushing the mist that clings to the edges of the fields. The air smells faintly of smoke, dew, and bread baking somewhere just beyond the horizon. You notice the villagers moving slowly but deliberately, each step measured against invisible dangers. Life is fragile here, yet stubborn. Every motion is an act of survival, even if it looks mundane at first glance. A woman carries a basket of eggs carefully along the narrow street. You follow her with your eyes, noticing the way she shifts her weight to keep them from breaking. You sense the constant vigilance required to keep life going in a medieval town. A dropped basket could mean no breakfast, no income, no small victories to anchor the day. Even such simple tasks are threaded with quiet tension. Nearby, a man hammers a fence post into the ground. Sparks fly from his metal tool, and the rhythm of his work seems almost hypnotic. You feel the weight of repetitive labor, the kind that builds not just fences but resilience. These actions, mundane to you, monumental to them, shape the contours of survival. You can almost hear the scholar murmuring. Scholars still argue whether such repetitive labor strengthened communities by fostering cohesion, or if it merely filled hours in a world defined by uncertainty. You let the ambiguity linger. A mainstream historical fact filters into your mind. Medieval towns were densely packed, which made the spread of disease almost inevitable. Streets were narrow, sanitation rudimentary, and the concept of quarantine rudimentary at best. You feel the tension settle into your body, imagining every cough, every shared cup of water, every crowded market as a potential threat. Survival required vigilance, luck, and sometimes sheer stubbornness. You wander into the marketplace, now more active with the morning bustle. Merchants shout their wares, children run between stalls, and dogs weave through the legs of passers-by. You pause to watch a man demonstrate a medicinal concoction. Crushed herbs, honey, a bit of wine. You inhale the scent. Pungent, earthy, slightly sweet. You watch villagers approach cautiously, curious yet hesitant. Even small remedies are treated as sacred, the difference between hope and despair tangible in the air. A quirky detail draws your gaze. A cat lounges atop a barrel, swatting lazily at coins dropped by a distracted customer. You chuckle softly. Someone clearly believes the cat brings luck or wards off evil spirits. In a world where threats could arrive unseen, small charms and superstitions were as crucial as skill and knowledge. You feel a fleeting sense of warmth at the thought of humor and superstition softening the harsh edges of life. You follow a narrow alley toward the town's water pump, where women gather to draw water in buckets. You notice a child struggling with a heavy pail. A woman steps in, steadying the child's arms and guiding the weight. The small act carries layers of meaning, care, teaching, endurance, and survival. You feel the rhythm of life in these minor gestures, every shared burden a lifeline in a world that demanded constant effort. A distant bell tolls from the chapel. The sound echoes through the village, a reminder that time is moving inexorably forward, indifferent to illness, hunger, or human plans. You think of those who have passed recently, those who will face disease later today, and those who navigate daily life with a careful blend of hope and fear. You inhale slowly, letting the melancholy sit gently. Life persists despite everything. You wander toward a small workshop where a man shapes clay into pots. You watch his hands move deftly, forming vessels with precision and care. You consider how these everyday objects, pots, tools, clothing, are lifelines. They carry water, cook food, store grain, and hold warmth. Every handcrafted item represents ingenuity and perseverance, a small act of mastery over a world that often feels hostile. A scholarly whisper surfaces. Scholars still argue whether the development of craft specialization in medieval towns significantly improved survival rates, or primarily enhanced economic stability. You nod slowly, letting the uncertainty settle like dust in the morning sun. Either way, the human impulse to shape the world, to create tools and solutions, is undeniably present. You wander toward a bakery, drawn by the rich scent of bread rising in the oven. You watch a young apprentice knead dough under the careful supervision of an older baker. Flour dust hangs in the air like fine mist, softening edges and warming the senses. You feel a sense of continuity, the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. Even in danger, in illness, in loss, life persists because people teach, nurture, and continue the work that sustains their communities. You leave the bakery, your steps taking you toward the fields beyond the village. You notice the farmers already at work, tending crops with a blend of determination and fatigue. You sense the rhythm of the land, planting, tending, harvesting, and sometimes mourning what's lost to weather, pests, or disease. Each movement is a negotiation with fate, a dialogue between human will and nature's unpredictability. As you move into the open fields, the morning sun now warming your back, you feel a connection to the medieval world that is tangible and quiet. Every small task, every careful act of care or creation, every superstition or ritual, is a thread weaving resilience into daily life. You breathe deeply, letting the sense of earth and grass fill your lungs, and feel the enduring pulse of people determined to live despite the relentless pressures surrounding them. The village behind you begins to hum with life, the distant clatter of tools, the murmur of voices, the soft laughter of children. And as you walk forward, leaving the rooftops and smoke behind, you feel the rhythm of survival continue around you, persistent, quiet, and strangely comforting. You follow a winding dirt track that leads away from the village, stepping into open fields dotted with wildflowers and long grasses. The morning light has fully emerged, painting everything in soft gold, and you can hear the hum of insects beginning their day. You pause for a moment, letting the wind brush against your face. It carries faint scents of soil, hay, and a hint of smoke from distant chimneys. The world feels alive, yet fragile, as if every blade of grass could tell a story of persistence. You wander past a small shepherd's hut, smoke curling from its chimney. A young boy sits outside, weaving a basket from reeds. His fingers move with astonishing precision, twisting and pulling, shaping something that will hold eggs, grain, or herbs. You watch him silently, sensing the patience and skill that life demands in these times. Every simple act, drawing water, weaving baskets, tending sheep, is embedded with survival and ingenuity. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your thoughts. Livestock was essential to medieval survival, providing food, labor, and trade goods, but it also spread disease in ways people often didn't understand. You feel the tension in this balance. Nourishment and risk, necessity and danger intertwined. You imagine families calculating their steps carefully, learning through experience which animals to keep close and which to guard against, always negotiating with uncertainty. You wander closer to the boy, noticing the small dog at his side. It nudges him with a playful paw but stays alert, ears twitching at every distant sound. You smile, recognizing that even in danger and hardship, companionship offers comfort and a sense of protection. The boy laughs softly, the sound carrying across the fields. It's brief, fleeting, but it punctuates the quiet persistence of life. Then, a quirky detail catches your eye. The boy has attached a tiny carved wooden bird to the handle of his basket, painted bright red and blue. You chuckle softly. You can imagine him believing this little bird brings luck or wards off misfortune. In a world where threats were constant, small charms and rituals were a silent, essential part of life. They offered hope in the simplest, most tangible form. You continue down the track, reaching a patch of tilled land where women are tending crops. Their hands are rough and worn, moving with practiced rhythm. You notice the older women teaching younger ones how to sow seeds evenly, how to pull weeds without disturbing roots. Every gesture is deliberate, every movement shaped by years of trial and error. You feel the quiet dignity in labor that sustains life day after day. A scholarly whisper floats through your mind. Scholars still argue whether communal agricultural knowledge had a measurable impact on survival, or if it primarily reinforced social cohesion. You let the question linger as you watch the women work. Even without definitive answers, the act of teaching, sharing, and passing down knowledge is itself an act of endurance. Nearby, a man repairs a cart wheel, hammering carefully, sweat glistening on his brow. You notice the rhythm of his work, the way he listens to the wood and metal, coaxing them into alignment. Every tool, every repaired wheel, every patched roof or stitched garment is an extension of human adaptability. These small, tangible solutions are threads woven into the broader fabric of medieval life, keeping communities functional despite uncertainty. You wander further, noticing a small flock of geese near a pond. Their harsh calls echo across the field, mixing with the wind in a strangely musical way. You pause to watch them, recognizing how even ordinary creatures were crucial to survival, watchdogs, food sources, or natural alarm systems. You inhale slowly, appreciating the balance of nature and human ingenuity. A mainstream historical fact surfaces again. Medieval diets were seasonal and heavily dependent on local resources. Hunger was as much a threat as disease, and storing and preserving food required knowledge and foresight. You imagine families planning meals, hoarding grains, and creating methods to stretch their harvests through lean months. Every bite, every preserved loaf or dried herb, was a testament to their foresight and determination. You wander along the pond's edge, noticing a small boy attempting to catch frogs. His laughter pierces the quiet air. You watch, heart softening. Even in a world so dangerous, there were moments of play, curiosity, and learning. The precarious balance of survival did not erase joy, it simply made it more fragile, more precious. You continue walking, following a low stone wall that marks the boundary of the farmland. Beyond it lies a forest, dark and inviting. The trees sway gently in the breeze, and you feel a pull toward the shelter they offer. You sense the possibility of danger, but also the potential for solace. You step into the shade, letting the coolness of the woods settle over your shoulders. A scholarly whisper drifts again. Scholars still argue whether forested areas offered protection from disease outbreaks or if they were merely sites of isolation and limited resources. You let it hang in the air as you wander deeper, feeling the quiet tension between shelter and scarcity. The sunlight filters through the canopy, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. You feel the rhythm of life slowing here, the tension of the day easing. Birds call softly, and small creatures wrestle in the undergrowth. You sense that even in the wild, survival depends on awareness, adaptability, and respect for the forces around you. Finally, you pause in a small clearing, letting the forest's calm envelop you. The medieval world stretches behind you in memory. The village, the fields, the chapel, the families, the daily acts of endurance. You breathe slowly, feeling the continuity of life threading through time, and sense that even in a world full of threats, human resilience shines quietly, persistently, like the sun breaking through the trees. You move deeper into the forest, the trees towering above you, their leaves forming a soft, rustling canopy. The morning sun filters through in fragmented beams, lighting patches of moss and fallen leaves in a gentle glow. The air feels cool and damp, scented with earth and the faint tang of pine. Each step you take on the soft forest floor feels deliberate, almost reverent. You sense the quiet pulse of life here, intertwined with the remnants of medieval survival. The foraging, the hunting, the secret knowledge of which plants heal and which harm. You wander past a cluster of wild berries, their red and blue fruits gleaming like tiny jewels. You kneel to inspect them, imagining the countless medieval families who depended on such foraged foods during lean months. One wrong choice could mean sickness, but the right knowledge, a habit passed down through generations, could sustain life. You feel the careful balance between risk and reward, instinct and wisdom, as you brush the berries gently with your fingers. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your thoughts. Wild plants and herbs were critical to medieval diets and medicine, often supplementing scarce resources and providing remedies where doctors or healers could not. You imagine women and men memorizing these lessons, wandering forests and fields to gather what could keep their families alive. You inhale the earthy scent and sense the intimate bond humans shared with the land. Further along, you spot a small stream trickling over stones, its water crystal clear and cold. You kneel to touch it, letting your fingers trail through the flow. You imagine the medieval villagers collecting water from such streams, mindful of contamination, teaching their children which sources were safe. You sense the tension in every sip, a reminder that survival required both caution and courage. A quirky detail catches your eye. Perched on a branch above the stream is a small wooden figurine shaped like a fox. You smile. Someone clearly believed this little fox would bring luck, ward off danger, or guide travelers. Even in serious, threatening circumstances, charm and whimsy had their place. You chuckle softly, realizing that hope often wears many faces, from practical action to small rituals and talismans. You follow the stream, noticing signs of animals, hoofprints, pawprints, and the occasional feather. Life in the forest moves quietly, persistently, each creature part of the same survival dance as humans. You pause, letting your senses drink in the subtle movements, the tiny noises, the smell of wet earth. You sense the shared rhythm of life. Prey and predator, grower and gatherer, predator and human, all negotiating space and safety in an unforgiving world. You wander to a moss-covered stone that serves as a small bench and sit, letting the forest absorb your presence. You reflect on the daily challenges medieval people faced: illness, hunger, unpredictable weather, social instability. Every small act, carving tools, building shelters, collecting herbs, or sharing knowledge, was an assertion of life over circumstance. You feel the quiet determination threading through centuries, a persistent heartbeat of human ingenuity. A scholarly whisper surfaces. Scholars still argue whether isolated forest communities had better survival rates during disease outbreaks or if isolation merely prolonged scarcity. You let the question linger as you watch a bird alight on a nearby branch, flitting between light and shadow. The uncertainty mirrors the medieval world itself, fragile, unpredictable, yet alive with resilience. You wander deeper into the forest, following the path of soft earth and fallen leaves. You notice a small clearing ahead, where a makeshift lean-to shelters a few people. They sit in a circle, tending a small fire, their faces etched with both fatigue and quiet resolve. You watch as one woman stirs a pot, another repairs clothing, and a child collects twigs for the fire. Every gesture speaks of survival, cooperation, and the ingenuity required to endure. A mainstream historical fact surfaces again. Many medieval people relied on temporary forest dwellings, especially during plagues or famines, to reduce exposure and access resources. You imagine the logistics: food gathering, fire tending, guarding against predators. You feel the steady rhythm of necessity, the tireless vigilance required for life to persist outside the structured village. You move closer, careful to remain unseen. You notice the group sharing small amounts of food, dividing resources meticulously. You sense the quiet tension between scarcity and generosity, understanding that mutual aid often determines survival. You breathe slowly, letting the human spirit in these acts resonate inside you. A quirky detail draws your attention. Someone has fashioned a tiny scarecrow out of twigs and rags, complete with a painted face that looks both serious and absurd. You laugh softly. Even amid hardship, creativity and humor thrive. You feel the lesson. Survival is as much about heart and mind as it is about skill. As the sun climbs higher, you follow the forest path that leads out of the clearing, feeling the quiet strength of these isolated lives linger with you. You walk with care, understanding the balance between nature's generosity and its indifference, and the fragile, tenacious thread that medieval humans wove through it all. Finally, you reach the edge of the forest. The fields stretch beyond, sunlight warming the grasses and the distant village. You inhale deeply, carrying the forest's calm into the day ahead. The medieval world, with all its threats and delicate triumphs, feels present, resilient, and strangely comforting. You emerge from the forest onto a gentle hillside, the sunlight spilling across rolling fields that shimmer with morning dew. The village lies below, tiny and distant, smoke rising in thin spirals from chimneys. You take a deep breath, letting the expansive view settle your thoughts. From this vantage, you sense the rhythm of life below, the slow movements of villagers tending animals, the distant clatter of carts, the faint laughter of children weaving through cobblestone streets. Even at a glance, survival is visible here, not just as necessity, but as persistence in motion. You wander toward a small cluster of farmsteads scattered along the hillside. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, mixing with the crisp air. You notice a woman pounding grain with a wooden pestle, her movements rhythmic and steady. Each strike is deliberate, shaped by experience, necessity, and fatigue. You sense that such repetitive labor, often invisible to outsiders, was the backbone of survival. You pause, imagining the countless hands across generations that performed the same motion, sustaining families and communities. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Medieval grains were central to nutrition, yet vulnerable to spoilage, pests, and famine. You feel the tension behind each meal, the careful measures needed to store and protect what could sustain life through uncertain seasons. You watch the woman set aside a small pile of flour, likely saving it for emergencies or sharing it with neighbors, a silent act of foresight and community care. You wander closer to a small herd of goats grazing near the edge of a field. The animals move with deliberate patience, nibbling and shifting, their bells tinkling softly. You imagine their significance: milk, cheese, trade, even companionship. Livestock was more than sustenance, it was a buffer against unpredictability, a living hedge against misfortune. You pause to watch a goat nuzzle its kid, noticing how care and attention permeated even the most ordinary interactions. A quirky detail catches your eye. Someone has tied a tiny charm around the goat's neck, a small carved wooden clover. You laugh softly, imagining someone believing it protects the animal from illness or misfortune. Even in a harsh world, superstition and small rituals offered comfort and control, however symbolic. You sense that these little beliefs, passed down quietly, shaped lives just as surely as labor and skill. You wander past the grazing animals to a small garden where a woman tends herbs and vegetables. You notice her hands, darkened and calloused from years of work, moving deftly between plants. She checks leaves for pests, pulls weeds, and harvests tender shoots with care. Every movement communicates knowledge, patience, and survival instinct. You feel a quiet admiration for the silent wisdom embedded in daily labor, the accumulated lessons that kept communities alive. A scholarly whisper drifts into your mind. Scholars still argue whether informal knowledge of plants and healing had measurable impact on survival rates, or if it mainly offered psychological comfort in uncertain times. You let the thought linger, aware that even if the benefit was partly symbolic, it shaped choices, guided behavior, and infused daily life with subtle power. You wander to a small pond nearby, watching ducks glide across the water. The surface ripples, reflecting sunlight in fractured patterns. You imagine medieval families relying on such ponds for water, fish, and practical needs, constantly negotiating scarcity and safety. You feel the rhythm of balance. Nature offering resources, humans extracting with care and caution. Every interaction carries weight, a lesson in respect and persistence. A mainstream historical fact drifts back. Epidemics often spread via contaminated water, livestock, or crowded living conditions, making careful observation and avoidance essential. You sense the tension underlying every mundane act, the invisible stakes threaded through daily routines. Life was never casual here, it was deliberate, cautious, and intertwined with the natural and human-made world. You wander past the pond toward a small barn where a man tends hay for winter. You notice how he stacks bales carefully, leaving gaps for airflow, ensuring preservation. You realize each action is small, precise, yet monumental, an invisible armor against scarcity, a quiet defense against hunger. The mundane becomes heroic in this context, survival elevated through diligence and foresight. A quirky detail makes you grin. A cat perches atop the haystack, eyes half closed, swatting at invisible flies. You imagine villagers believing the cat brings luck or wards off pests. Humor and superstition thread through life here, softening edges and offering small comforts. Even the smallest creature plays a role in the delicate balance of human endurance. You wander slowly, absorbing the serene panorama. The village, the fields, the animals, and the people moving with quiet determination. Each element, the labor, the rituals, the natural resources, is a thread in the intricate tapestry of survival. You inhale the scent of earth and hay, letting it ground you in the rhythm of the medieval world, where life continued despite disease, hunger, and uncertainty. Finally, you pause on the hillside, letting your gaze linger across the landscape. The sun warms your back, the breeze brushes your face, and you sense a connection to those who lived and endured here centuries ago. Life, you realize, was fragile, yes, but it was also persistent, adaptive, and, in its quiet way, beautiful. You leave the hillside behind, following a narrow path that leads you toward a distant wood. The morning sun warms your shoulders, but the shade of the trees promises relief from the heat. The air is rich with the scent of pine, damp leaves, and soil, carrying with it a subtle, earthy promise of life that has persisted for centuries. You feel a quiet anticipation as you step under the canopy, the forest muffling the distant sounds of village life and wrapping you in a private, serene world. The ground beneath your feet is soft, covered with moss and fallen leaves. You notice the occasional mushroom sprouting from decaying wood, their shapes and colors strange and fascinating. You kneel to inspect one, imagining a medieval forager pausing here, deciding if this small growth would nourish or poison. You feel the weight of that knowledge, the constant negotiation with uncertainty that defined everyday life. Every step through these woods carries lessons of caution, observation, and instinct. A mainstream historical fact rises to the surface. Foraging was an essential survival skill for medieval peasants, supplementing scarce food supplies and providing herbs for medicine. You picture generations teaching children to distinguish edible plants from dangerous ones, passing on knowledge accumulated over centuries. You sense the intimacy of this tradition, the quiet pride in mastery over a dangerous, unpredictable environment. You wander deeper, following the sound of running water until you reach a small brook. You kneel to let the cold water slip through your fingers, tracing the path it carves through mossy stones. You imagine medieval villagers drawing water here, watching for signs of contamination, teaching children to respect both the gift and the danger of nature. You pause, letting the tension of survival settle into your body alongside a gentle awe at human adaptability. A quirky detail catches your eye. Someone has tied a small, painted stone to a branch, engraved with a rudimentary smiley face. You chuckle softly. It's a tiny human touch across the ages, a silent gesture meant to inspire joy, ward off misfortune, or simply mark presence. You feel a connection to that anonymous hand, realizing that humor and creativity were as much survival tools as labor and knowledge. You follow the brook, stepping over roots and stones, noticing signs of wildlife, a fox's footprint pressed in mud, the broken nest of a bird, and a squirrel darting across the path. Every creature here is part of the delicate balance of life, teaching the medieval observer lessons about caution, timing, and adaptation. You sense that survival wasn't just about humans, it was a careful dance with every element of the environment. You wander into a small clearing where the sun illuminates a patch of wildflowers. The colors are vivid, deep purples, yellows, and delicate whites that sway gently in the breeze. You pause, letting the simple beauty sink in, imagining how rare such moments of visual delight might have been for someone living under constant stress. You sense a medieval family stopping here briefly, perhaps gathering herbs or seeds, letting the serenity linger as a balm against uncertainty. A scholarly whisper drifts into your mind. Scholars still argue whether these small moments of respite, pausing in nature, noticing beauty, engaging in minor rituals, had measurable effects on health and survival, or if they primarily sustained mental resilience. You let the question hover, understanding that the answer may be both, entwined like the forest vines around ancient trees. You follow the path to a small, abandoned stone cottage tucked into the trees. The roof is partially collapsed, moss creeping across the walls, but you sense the echoes of human presence, a hearth long cold, remnants of pottery, the faint scent of smoke that lingered for decades. You imagine the family who once lived here, moving cautiously through daily life, crafting shelter, cooking meals, sharing stories by the fire. Every act, however small, was layered with survival, ingenuity, and determination. You wander around the cottage, noticing tiny carvings on the doorway, letters, symbols, and a small cross. Perhaps prayers, initials, or a guardian charm. You smile quietly, appreciating the human instinct to leave traces, to mark presence, to seek protection from unseen forces. Even in a harsh, unpredictable world, small acts of expression and care were threads of continuity, resilience, and hope. As you step away from the cottage, you notice the forest thinning, the fields stretching out ahead. Sunlight pours through the trees, warming your face and shoulders. You sense the rhythm of life once more. The fields, the animals, the labor, the rituals, the constant vigilance and care that defined medieval existence. You breathe deeply, letting the quiet endurance of centuries settle around you, a gentle hum beneath your skin. Finally, you pause on the edge of the woods, looking back over the path you've traveled. The medieval world, with its fragility, ingenuity, humor, and quiet courage, feels alive beneath your feet. You feel the pulse of life threading through time, resilient, persistent, and ever adapting, carrying whispers of the past into your own present. You step out of the forest into a wide, open meadow, the golden light of late afternoon stretching across tall grasses that sway gently in the breeze. The horizon is hazy, the sun dipping toward the edges of distant hills. You inhale the warm, earthy scent of grass and wildflowers, feeling the contrast between the open space and the dense forests behind you. The world feels simultaneously vast and intimate, as if every sound and smell carries stories of centuries past. Walking slowly, you notice small insects weaving through the air, their tiny wings catching sunlight like sparks. You pause to watch a bee land delicately on a bright yellow blossom, gathering nectar. You think about the medieval world, how dependent humans were on nature's rhythms, how even a simple act like pollination could dictate survival. Crops, livestock, and people alike moved in cycles governed by the sun, the rain, and the seasons. You sense a deep, quiet respect for the invisible systems that sustain life. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Medieval people lived in intimate connection with the natural world, relying on seasonal cycles for planting, harvesting, and survival. You imagine families planning their days, months, even years around these rhythms, balancing labor, risk, and hope. Each sunrise and rainfall carried consequence. Every miscalculation could mean hunger or illness. You feel the weight of that reality, the tension between dependence and resilience. You wander toward a small stream that winds lazily through the meadow. The water glimmers in the fading light, reflecting the sky in fractured patterns. You kneel to touch the cool surface, imagining generations of people drinking, washing, and sometimes praying at this same spot. You sense their vigilance, monitoring for disease, rationing resources, teaching children to respect what sustains them. Survival required attentiveness, humility, and constant adaptation. A quirky detail draws your attention. Carved into a smooth rock at the stream's edge is a tiny stick figure holding what looks like a fish. You chuckle softly, imagining a child or playful villager leaving a mark, an offering, a joke, or a talisman. Even amid hardship, creativity and humor provided solace, subtly reinforcing the threads of resilience woven through daily life. You continue walking, noting small clusters of wildflowers and scattered herbs along the water's edge. You bend to brush a leaf with your fingertips, savoring the subtle textures. You imagine medieval foragers recognizing each plant's utility, some for food, others for medicine, some as charms. Every interaction with the natural world was layered with significance, practical and symbolic, carrying the quiet wisdom of observation and experience. A scholarly whisper drifts in. Scholars still argue whether ritualized interaction with nature, collecting herbs, carving marks, observing wildlife, enhanced survival or mainly supported psychological endurance. You let the thought linger, understanding that human resilience often blends practicality with ritual, necessity with meaning. The sun sinks lower, painting the sky in soft pinks and purples. Shadows stretch across the meadow, and you feel the cool caress of evening air. You notice a lone deer grazing near the treeline, its cautious movements reminding you that vigilance is always necessary. Life balances on attentiveness and instinct, the medieval world and this quiet meadow no different in principle. You wander farther, the grass crunching softly beneath your feet. Small wildflowers nod in the wind, and the gentle burble of the stream carries a soothing rhythm. You pause to watch a flock of birds take flight, their wings slicing the air with grace. You sense that even amid scarcity, illness, and constant uncertainty, the world offered moments of quiet beauty, fleeting but enduring. A mainstream historical fact surfaces again. Communities often relied on observation of animals, weather patterns, and seasonal changes to anticipate scarcity or danger. You imagine the subtle knowledge embedded in everyday survival, the patience required to interpret small signs, the shared wisdom passed down through generations. You feel a deep respect for the intelligence, adaptation, and care that sustained lives for centuries. As evening descends, you find a soft patch of grass and sit, letting the cool air wrap around you. The sun has nearly vanished behind the hills, and stars begin to peek through the deepening sky. You sense the culmination of your journey through the medieval world. The chapels, villages, fields, forests, and quiet clearings, all connected by resilience, adaptability, and humanity. You feel a gentle calm, a shared heartbeat linking you to countless lives that came before. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The day's light fades, leaving only the soft sounds of wind through grass, distant bird calls, and the steady pulse of life continuing all around you. You feel the medieval world lingering in the folds of the present, a quiet echo of persistence, hope, and the delicate beauty of survival. The meadow grows quiet now, the last colors of sunset slipping beneath the horizon. The air is cooler, carrying a soft rustle of grass and the faint scent of earth and wildflowers. You lie back gently, letting the texture of the grass support your weight, feeling the pulse of the ground beneath you. Each breath you take seems to draw in the essence of centuries, people, animals, plants, and the gentle persistence of life. A distant owl calls softly, a lullaby from the forest beyond. You feel the tension of the day unwind, the pulse of survival slowing into a steady rhythm. You picture villagers resting by hearths, children dozing, livestock quieting in their pens, all moving into the delicate, essential pause between day and night. There is a serenity in this shared pause, a soft connection across time. Your thoughts drift gently over the journey you've taken. Chapels flickering with candlelight, forests dense and protective, fields bright with labor and care. Each scene carries a quiet lesson. Vigilance tempered with patience, work softened with humor, resilience threaded with hope. You sense the invisible threads linking every human act to survival, continuity, and fleeting moments of beauty. The sky deepens to navy, stars beginning to twinkle like scattered silver dust. A soft breeze brushes your cheeks, whispering through the grass and trees, carrying with it the echoes of lives that endured. You feel a deep, calm satisfaction, a shared heartbeat of generations resonating softly in your chest. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let your mind drift with the gentle rhythm of the world. Feel the quiet, persistent pulse of life surrounding you. Allow yourself to float softly into night, cradled by the enduring resilience of centuries past, knowing that every breath, every heartbeat, carries a whisper of continuity, courage, and gentle beauty.